Again, I'm trying to kind of reach out to Catherine.
Thank you.
You're in.
Morning. Looks like we have the full committee present. Catherine, if available and possible, I'd appreciate if you could turn your camera on just so that we can see committee members and more easily communicate and discuss. Thank you. Also, Eric and Catherine, before we begin, can you confirm that we can hear you? Can you give a test?
Yes, I can hear you. Happy New Year.
There we go. That's awesome.
Even if I can't find the right meeting invite.
I understand. All right. It is 10:04. Good morning to everyone. I'm Brennan Garrelts, chair of the Emergency Fire Cost Committee, and I'm calling this meeting of January 6, 2026 to order. We have all EFCC members are currently present. And I'm going to take a quick moment to ask Ms. Lowen if there are any attendees that need for this public meeting identification, but it does look like this is one of the benefits of virtual. It seems like everybody who is in attendance has their name up, so
yep.
I think we're good to go there. All right, committee members were emailed the meeting materials prior to the meeting, and these meeting materials will be available at the Board of Forestry website under committees, EFCC, and that will be updated as soon as possible after the meeting with any new information that may be shared during the meeting. Moving on to agenda item number 2. We'll look for an approval of the minutes of our November 26, 2025 meeting. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes, please?
So moved.
We have a motion by Bobby. Looking for a second.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the November 26, 2025 meetings, respond with aye.
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 Okay. Motion's unanimous and carries. Moving on to agenda item number 3, determining the unencumbered balance of the fund as of the end of the preceding calendar year. This is pursuant to ORS 477.760. Ms. Hobbs, can you please give us an update and a recommendation?
Certainly. Good morning. For the record, I'm Lorna Hobbs. I am the Finance Coordinator for the Emergency Fire Cost Committee. Under House Bill 3940, Oregon Revised Statute ORS 477, .760 requires the Emergency Fire Cost Committee to annually determine the unencumbered balance of the Oregon Forest Land Protection Fund as of the end of the preceding calendar year. The unencumbered balance of the fund has been calculated and is shown on the handout prepared for you. The cash balance on December 31st, 2025 was $11,262,296.76. The calculation of the unencumbered balance includes a reduction of $88,308.98 in administrative expenses not yet paid through December 31st. There were no other adjustments necessary. This results in a December 31st, 2025 unencumbered fund balance of $11,173,987.78. And I recommend the committee certify the unencumbered balance of the Oregon Forest Land Protection Fund as presented. And that is the end of my report. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from committee members? Okay, I'll look for a motion to certify the balance as presented.
I'll move to certify the balance as presented.
Okay, a second?
Second.
Second by Catherine. All those in favor respond with aye.
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 Okay. Again, the motion was unanimous and it carries. Thank you. I will add a comment now that we're done with that motion that having this balance is really important for our committee's work moving forward, that we have a pot of money that we can draw from to help pay, well, I should say the timing of tax receipts that funds this fund doesn't always match up with the timing of our payments back to the districts. So having this balance it was critical in the negotiations of 3940 that we had a balance so that we were not paying, we can operate on a cash flow basis with actual cash. The other benefit of having a balance is that interest in this fund that is generated can help pay for the administrative costs necessary for the committee. And again, this will help landowners truly pay for the district costs, and we'll be able to generate the operating expenses will be paid for through the interest, as well as any unpaid, any additional revenue from the interest can be utilized as it grows for future strategic investments that this committee has been engaged in for many years across the entire state. Thank you, Lorna. Any final discussions on that agenda item or comments from the committee members since I chose to speak? Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 4, repeal of OAR 629-165-40-0320. Nancy, can you please provide a report on the public hearings related to the repealing of these rules?
Sure. I'm Nancy Hirsch. I'm the Emergency Fire Cost Committee Administrator. Purpose of this agenda item is to seek the committee adoption of the proposed administrative rule repeal to Chapter 629, Division 165. So this is a decision item. The repeal of the rules was prompted by statute changes made by House Bill 3940 in the 2025 regular session. At your November 26 meeting, following that, we did a notice of proposed rulemaking and submitted the fiscal impact statement to the Secretary of State to publish in their December bulletin. Legislators and interested parties were notified consistent with the Emergency Fire Cost Committee procedural rules. The public comment period was open from December 15th through January 1st, and on December 18th of 2025, the public hearing was conducted. public comments were received, and those are in your attachment 2. One commenter appeared to be responding to ODF's proposed rule changes to their forest management plan. I shared that comment with the Department of Forestry, and also they've made it part of their public record, and of course it's on record with us as well. The other commenter supported the effort to remove outdated regulatory language and made 2 requests, which you can see in the attachment, about future policy work and communication. The public hearing that was held on December 18th, there were no comments received and 1 member of the public was present. And the hearings officer report is attachment 1 in your meeting material. The final rules are in attachment 3 with track change and then clean in attachment 4. The summary of rule changes, should say repeal, are consistent with what I presented to you at your November 26th meeting. And also it's there in your staff report should you want to go through that again. But no changes were made as a result of the public comments or the hearing. So bottom line is, my recommendation is that the EFCC direct the administrator to proceed with the promulgation of the proposed rule repeal as presented in the draft rule language for Chapter 629, Division 165 in your attachments 3 and 4.
Any
And there were-
questions or comments from committee members? And thank you, Nancy. Okay. Can I, let's open it up for a motion. The motion would likely be, if the committee so chooses, to proceed with the promulgation of the proposed rules repeal as presented in the rule language of Chapter 629, Division 165, to go into effect January 20th, 2026.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Bobby. All those in favor with approving the motion, which is to proceed with the promulgation of the proposed rules repeal as presented in rule language of Chapter 629, Division 165, to go into effect January 20th, 2026, respond with aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. The vote was unanimous and the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to agenda item number 5, which is the fiscal year 27 Oregon Forest Land Protection Fund distribution of payment to the Forest Protection District budgets. So on this agenda item, it's a bit complex and multivariate, so we will in the end have likely 4 different motions. I think it's 4, might be 5. I'm going to quickly walk through for the committee at a high level and then ask ODF staff to give a more nuanced and detailed presentation before we open it up to committee questions, discussion, and any motions. So under ORS 477.445, it requires that the committee oversee the distributions of funds from the OFLPF prior to the beginning of each fiscal year and distribute payments in their entirety as directed by the fiscal year budgets of forest protection districts to ODF. Even though it's January and the fiscal year begins July 1, districts will begin working on their annual budgets early this spring. And this means that the committee needs to address this item now in order to provide ODF and the associations necessary direction on the dollar amounts that each district can expect out of our fund. So what this means for the committee is that we need to make an interim decision in this meeting on the distribution methodology and the amount from the fund for the 2 revenue sources that we collect on. That is, and I'm grouping these are my own groupings. We collect on harvest tax, and we also collect on minimum lots and improved lot surcharges. And the districts, each of the districts need to be able to understand the monies, the revenues from our fund so that they can then accurately establish their budgets as it relates to the pro rata per acre rates that they assign to the large landowners and other landowners to meet their total budgeted amount. So our job for this interim decision is to work out how we are going to allocate and make sure that it is consistent with law and provides clear and repeatable instruction to ODF that they can work with and help their districts establish their budgets. With that, I think I will hand it off to Michael or anyone else who's here to present on this so that we can get a better understanding of what we're talking about here.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you,
Mr.
Brennan.
Curran, the floor is yours.
Okay. So yeah, just so if folks don't know me, Michael Curran, I'm the Fire Protection Division Chief for ODF. I do have Tracy Ralston here, I think. At least I thought I saw him on. Tracy, if you're on, if you can throw your camera on, he'll help with the presentation and chime in on things I am off base on or need correcting. So Elise or Jen, are you able to throw the PowerPoint up so folks can see that? Oh, this is the chart. We need the actual PowerPoint up. So while that's happening, just some background. So Brennan hit it on the head pretty well. Just timing with us needing to develop our FY27 protection budgets. We really needed to get a decision this month because if we would have waited till March, our districts are well underway with their budget development that it would have been tough to make a decision that late. So with that, we'll kind of go through our minimums and surcharges and an overview there of how we've done it in the past, and then what recommendations we have for the committee for the decision needing made, and then we'll also discuss some of the harvest tax nuances. Varied and nuanced is spot on with a lot of this. It's kind of converging of pre-3940 funds, timing of implementation of some of the changes in House Bill 3940, and what's available to us moving forward. So just trying to get in the best spot that we can heading into FY27 and past that. So on this first slide, what you're seeing is in regards to our minimums and surcharges and our county collection rates that we see across the state within each of the districts. So the top chart on in the white, we have data going back to FY18, so essentially 2017 through 2024 calendar year to show the percentage collected at each of the county assessor's office that we work through for our minimums, surcharges, and our per acre rates. Then there's a chart down on the bottom left that outlines essentially what the 5-year average is for each of the districts and the collection rates that we see. Historically, when it comes to budgeting for any of our minimums and surcharges and revenues received through a per acre rate, we've always used a 97% collection rate. And the main reason for that being is that taxpayers get 3% off for paying on time, and we want to make sure and take that into consideration. So when the time comes and we say we put 100% and 97% only showed up or less, we're not overestimating on revenues, because that'll have downstream impacts for us in future budget years to make sure that we don't have to over collect the next time to make up that difference. So historically, we've always stuck with a 97% average for our budgeting in terms of revenues received. You'll notice on this chart that many of the collection rates, or not many, but some of the collection rates are over 100%. And there's numerous variables that are tied to this. But 3 of the big ones that we've noticed are just taxpayer payments that are made late and then those catching up in subsequent years. There's numerous other variables, whether it was due to COVID and some of the issues we saw during that time frame, missed invoices from from the counties and some of the landowners that we interact with, and then corrections that were made just for coding errors and things like that. And again, if that wasn't caught on the actual year that those revenues were received, then that would throw off some of those collection rates. Hence why we see some of that over 100%. And then there is the human variable with the inaccurate minimum calculations. So there's some nuance in how we calculate our minimums in terms of revenues received. And there's calculations that have to occur at the district level for that. And sometimes those are off at times and can go towards either showing an over collection or showing an under collection when the revenues are actually received. For that one in particular, it is something over the last couple of years we've been trying to fine tune how those minimums are calculated so we can get better training for our staff out in the field and here in Salem to make sure that those are more accurate moving forward. So kudos to Tracy and his staff for trying to make sure we're set up for success and really see decreased calculation errors when it comes to our minimums. And then part of it is too with this, just for awareness, we do monitor districts that fall below 97%. And those, again, I wouldn't say there's a trend for specific reasons why. Each one's varied and nuanced and different for what we run into. But we try to make sure and work with the counties if we start to see them dropping below that 97% range over time. So we can try to see what the root cause of the issue is and go from there. So just awareness on that one. And before I get into the decisions needing made, there was talk with 39 as part of the Fire 35 and as House Bill 3940 was being discussed through last legislative session, that the overall intent of the minimum and surcharge revenues is that those would go back to the districts they were received from. And really where this comes into play, right? Minimums and surcharges are more into play where there's that larger WUI interface. So those are generally our more costly fires that we get. So we want to make sure that the appropriate revenue is going back to those districts that have that larger WUI interface than some districts that may not have that high of exposure. So just know there was kind of those overarching discussions as part of the Fire 35 and House Bill 3940 going from there. So before I get into the decisions, I guess, Tracy, anything else to add on this slide?
No, Michael, I think you covered it very well. And just reiterating what Michael said, that, we're pinpointing and getting into more detail in the back end calculations just to make sure over years, good intent where they started, and cross-checking to make sure that we're still implementing the correct way to maximize the revenue being received and appropriate through the landowners.
Yep.
Thanks.
And Michael, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in. I have
Yep,
one
please
go
do.
back. I have one go back that I failed to bring up. In our last meeting for the committee, this is an important context. We discussed and that we would be breaking up into work groups to work on several different topics to bring this committee and our rules and policies into alignment with 3940. What we are deciding, I mentioned in my preamble that this is an interim decision. There will be a work group that will be focused on establishing a reputable and repeatable process moving forward that the work group will bring forward to the committee. So the decision that we're making today, as I said, is interim because that work group it would be irresponsible to make a permanent decision right here and now in this case. The better path is that we put this into a work group and really dig in to make sure that we understand it and that we're doing things in a very responsible manner, representing all those who pay into this fund. And so we will have another opportunity. Any decisions today are just a one-time decision because the budgets process is beginning for ODF, and we'll have another opportunity from a committee to review what the work group brings forward and the suite of options on how to distribute these funds moving forward in 2028 fiscal year. Did I get my fiscal years right? I sometimes screw up fiscal and calendar years. Sorry.
Yep.
So a little context on why we are dealing with this now, also why I refer to it as an interim decision.
Yeah. No, thank you for that clarification, Brennan. So, and I guess with that, so from the committee members, any questions on anything on this slide that you have before I kind of go into what decisions we would need made to help our budget folks out?
Michael, this is Catherine. Before you launch into that, just please remind me what this slide shows as far as which fiscal years versus calendar years this money shows, because we're going to be dividing stuff up, and I want to make sure that I have a clear baseline of what numbers are represented on this slide before we start talking about the interim, so we can all build from the same base concept of this much money, and this is where the percentages came from.
Yep. Tracy, do you want to take that one? I saw you jump up there.
Hey, Tracy.
Yep, you bet, Michael. Hey, Catherine, how you doing? So these are all fiscal years, so July through June on the calculations here. And the percentages themselves are derived from our anticipated revenues we expected to collect through assessments, minimums and surcharges. The expected amount, based off the acres and rates and all of that good stuff we have in the back end for calculations. And then the actual dollar at the end of the year, once the books are all balanced, that we did receive through county assessments or through ODF billings of assessments, the public entities predominantly. And did we receive all the money we anticipated? And really, that's where the percentages derive from at this point. Fairly simple math, up with quotes around simple, lots of moving pieces in the back end of revenue coming in and all of that. I will highlight one thing though. If you look down at the lower left-hand corner in the blue, that 5-year average for fiscal year 21 to 25, you'll see like a SWO there has 118% collection rate for a 5-year average. Just for context, SWO has a very small amount of grazing acres. So it doesn't take that much difference to affect the percentage to go way up. So a little context there also of, like Michael said, a lot of times these are like payments came in later the following fiscal year. Let's say somebody caught up on their taxes or whatever it might be with the county. And that would force, 199%, things like that to occur rather than our traditional 97%. So just a little context there on that. That help you out, Catherine?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that we were all operating from, no, these are not people that are paying their taxes. It's about the timing of when the revenue comes into the district, when your system captures it. And it's with the assumption that everybody's going to pay on time and there's 3% less. Did I
Bingo.
state it simplistically correct?
Yep.
Spot on from my take. Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from committee members?
Michael, I have one. Are collection rates as a whole statewide, are they trending down, up, kind of staying the same? I've just been trying to look across there per, each district. And do you know that off the top of your head?
Yeah, I don't know. And Tracy, you might know better on this because you've been looking at it more closely than I have. But I wouldn't say I think they're trending down slightly from what we've seen in the past. But I don't think at least in my opinion, I wouldn't say it's necessarily something that's alarming to me quite yet. But that's just what I've seen at the individual districts I worked at. Tracy probably has that better sense of a statewide view if he thinks something's a little different there from that purview.
No, I agree with you, Michael. You know, a small tick down, I would say. But again, through the collection process, I mean, there's laws and statutes tied to liens on property and all of that. So ultimately, taxes need to be paid and bills need to be paid that are sent out eventually. So that downward tick we're seeing a little bit will get caught up at some point or another. And overall, you know, the areas where you might see a downward when you're looking at the chart here, like if I look at KLD there, Klamath Lake District, you know, FY 25 and 91% on timber, 97% the year before. That doesn't necessarily mean that it was a huge downward. What we're also seeing is the complexity of the system and the counties in particular who need to deal with our assessment collections. They're humans and errors are made sometimes. And between our tracking we have and then districts coordinating with the counties, we'll find out where that error was cooperatively with the county. And a lot of times it comes down to they accidentally moved funds that should have been distributed to ODF, and they accidentally moved them to a different fund, and they rectify that year or the following year. So again, I wouldn't do a knee-jerk reaction on seeing whoa, Klamath went from 97 to 91. What's going on there? But it's something like Michael said, we keep tabs on, prompt districts when we're doing tracking, and they reach out to the county and find out what's going on. And maybe it was an error, or maybe it's just as simple as, yeah, a bunch of people didn't pay their taxes for some reason this year.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too, like each county is a little different on how they operate within their assessor's office. Each of them have different process or programs at times, so it's not a one size fits all with all the counties that we interact with. Each of them are slightly different in how they operate, so we have to adjust to that as well because they're doing a ton of work for us in order to generate this revenue through the property taxes. So we've kind of adjust to them, but there are some nuances just with each county is a little different in how they operate. So.
Thank you,
Okay.
Michael.
Yep. Okay, I think if there's no other questions, we can move on to the decision slide. So if you want to go to the next one, Jen. Okay. So really the decisions today we need from you all so we can continue forward with our budget development is what percentage of the OFLPF revenues we need to allocate to district budgets. Do we show 97% like we historically have? Or do you all want to use another percentage? And then also just verifying that through those conversations with the Fire 35 and House Bill 3940, that those disbursements of the OFLPF revenues are sent back to the district they were received from, or if there's another option you all would prefer. So those are the two decision points we need from you all today with the minimums and surcharges.
Thank you, Michael. Eric, you have a comment?
Question. Are we mandated to define a percentage? I know the percentage is a department mandated budgeting tool, but are we obligated to define a budget for or a percentage?
Am I the only one that can't hear Eric?
I can hear him, but barely.
I can't hear him.
Okay, I can barely hear you, Eric.
Can you hear me better now?
Barely.
Barely.
You may have the wrong microphone selected.
Just yell.
You guys can move on. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'll summarize what I did hear from Eric is that are we mandated to pick a percentage? And he'll add that to the chat. Well, one thing before we move forward, ultimately, in my mind, the reason that we need to pick a percentage is to ensure that we don't over allocate or overspend to the districts beyond what our expected collections are. Because each fiscal year we're going to have to make a prediction. The district budget process will be developed prior to all of our revenues being received. So we're making a budgetary decision here on how much do we allocate. And to the same point, we also want to make sure that we're allocating the revenue that we are receiving, right? And that we're not holding back and putting into the fund monies that should be going to the districts. And so it's finding that balance of what is the appropriate percentage of expected revenues, so that we're trying to find an appropriate amount that is sustainable.
Yep. Yeah.
Excuse me.
I think that's spot on, Brennan. And part of it too is I think over time we've noticed that 97% is really a good target. Because it's one of those things too, we don't want to continually overestimate to where we're continually under collecting, or underestimating, I should say, for our budget purposes, because we always got to make that up that following year, which we try to avoid the best we can for our landowner base, so we can have steady rates the best that we can. So I think we've shown that, 97% is a fairly good average over time for us, just with how long we've been implementing it from the 97% standpoint. And I think Ryan Miller's on, and I know Tracy's on and James on. So if I misspeak on this, but I don't believe there is a mandate that says we have to use a percentage for this. Internally within ODF, we've just been using that 97% historically, just based off knowing that taxpayers do get that 3% savings if they pay on time. But James or Tracy or Ryan, am I misspeaking there that there's nothing out there that specifically mandates that?
There is nothing that states that we need to use 97%. That's an internal mechanism, like Brandon and Michael have said, to make sure we're not overestimating our collection amount and we end up short, which then, like Michael said, just increases rates even more, instead of trying to mitigate that. And again, this 97% and that function on the budgets, that has been used well before my time here, probably well before most of our times here. So that was mitigated many, many, many years ago to make sure that we're balancing out the books the best we can based on expected collection amounts.
And just as a reminder, this is a decision for one single budget cycle. And the committee will get an opportunity to review that. And something else to keep in mind too, if we do create a budget based on 97% and we this is for the future and for consideration in the work group, and continue to collect over 97%, we can probably establish mechanisms by which we send that money back to the districts in future years, or use it for other means. This is not, if a more than 97% is collected, the money stays in the fund for the purposes of the fund, which are very clearly written in statute, and they will not be going off to other, they don't get swept into other things. This is for fire preparedness at the district level. Any other questions or comments before we look for a motion and discussion?
Yes.
Yep. Go ahead.
Catherine, my belief on the use of the revenues is, and how they should be allocated, is based on the Emergency Fire Cost Committee's staunch belief in fiduciary responsibility and oversight, based on good decision-making based on facts. And I hear like beeping in the background. I'm not sure why, but anyway, I'm not sure if people can hear me. But we've always made our decision based on metrics, and to disperse these interim funds in this period where we're between state operating fiscal years and the collection of the revenues on a calendar year, I believe that we need to look at the amount of taxable well, the amount of protected forest land in the districts and dividing based on the amount of forest land that is protected in the specific districts. And that's a metric that we should consider as we look at how to allocate this revenue in the interim. And please note that this is an interim thought, and it is not necessarily a long-term thought, but the other way to look at it, in my view, would be to peanut butter it across everybody. And that would work in theory if all the districts had the same amount of protected forest land that they work to vigorously protect from wildland fire, which they don't. And those are my thoughts at this point in time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Any other comments, questions?
Brennan, are we gonna have more conversation about that third bullet there? Like, is there another slide or anything coming on this?
Yeah, that'll be a separate, right now, I'm gonna break this up. Well, let's continue with that, before we look for a motion for because ultimately the motion is around improved and minimum lot. Breaking this out into approved minimum lot revenues as well as harvest tax. So let's continue that as we talk about, as we wrestle with this before we seek. We're going to need two motions likely. Michael, do you have any further comments on the disbursements relative to where they were charged? That's the right word, or collected?
No, I think just reminding folks, I think for this one, a lot of the reasons why conversations were around, and I was not a part of all those conversations, but how I'm understanding it, was that truly those districts, such as a Southwest Oregon or Central Oregon district that has that higher wildland urban interface, that they should be receiving the higher revenues that they get from those minimums and surcharges to alleviate from those more costly fires that we see in those areas. So I see
the higher level of protection required given the amount of WUI, right?
Yeah. Yep. So I see a lot of value in making sure that the revenues go back to where the districts they were received from, and those counties, just due to the nature of the WUI environment and how costly fires can be in there, and the increased protection that we need to have.
Yeah, I think there's some value, and this is my own opinion. There is some value to being able to tell a tax-paying citizen that they're paying for the protection directly.
Yep.
That those dollars that they are spending and they are seeing in their tax bill are going back to paying for the protection that they see driving on the same highways and same roads that they live on. Tracy?
Thanks, Brian. Just want to make a comment back, Catherine, to the metric thing, and just so disclosure for everybody on our metrics. So for years and to this day, ODF has very detailed systems and tracking mechanisms when it comes to assessment collections, based on the acres and between timber and grazing per districts. We know exactly how many minimums per district are charged, how many surcharges per district are charged. So we know exactly the dollar amounts related to each district based on their readiness budget and rate for landowners. So again, just throwing out there that all those metrics are in place and available for everybody to view openly.
Excellent, thank you. Any other go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you, Tracy. And that's what I was getting at, in addition to forest land protected, is that we know where the funds came from per district, and that we have a solid metric that, in my view, meets fiduciary responsibility in order to allocate that money back to those districts. That we have something to lay it on other than spreading it across all districts, or this group choosing where to send it, not based on a metric. And but one thing that I want to add to, so people understand my decision making, Oregon's system is a complete and coordinated system, and yes, and we all help each other out. And so, with that said, everybody comes together when there is a problem and using the funds available from their districts to solve things. So there is that overlayer also. And I just wanted to recognize that, because if I didn't, then Mr. Curran would be wondering if I'd been listening. Thank you.
Heath, does that, I mean, you asked a good question in terms of the discussion right now. Does that meet where you were looking in terms of the second bullet point?
Well, no, I mean, like, I was just talking about the third bullet point, right? The, like, and I'm not a voting member here. I just don't feel like back to the district they were received from sounds real good to me. I don't even know what the other options are really, and I don't feel like we've talked about those. So I apologize if I've missed it.
No, that's excellent. Michael or Tracy, I have some ideas of what other options are, but you guys are the experts. Would you be willing to potentially just lay out what a potential suite of options would be if we did chose to not send them back to the districts?
Yeah, I think the first go-to would be pro rata. Essentially just spread it out over a percentage in terms of how much acres each district protects. That would be the other option available to us. I guess Tracy, help me out here. What else could be out there other than
before you invent a bunch of things that might cause problems in the conversation? It sounds and when the AFCC has been in this position in the past, have they always dispersed them back to the district they were received from? Is this just protocol?
No, with 3940, this is new. A new process in that when we collected on these revenue sources in the past, it went to large fire and was distributed across the state for any large fire anywhere, right? And so Northwest Oregon ratepayers were paying for fires in Eastern Oregon and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I don't know if anybody's interested in my opinion. It sounds like the right answer is to give the people their money back if it's needed, that is to say back to the district they were received from. But this like bullet like presupposed that there may be some live question about how that should be handled. And it feels awkward to me, I guess, that you would assess districts on some basis other than acreage, and then you would disperse that money out to districts on the basis of acreage. That seems like not terribly equitable, but I'll leave that to others.
And Heath, I mean, for the record, and I mean, let it be known for this committee, like though not a voting member, you're on this committee as a valuable resource, and I encourage you to speak up and offer your opinions, representing the Board of Forestry, right? So I raise your hand and ask questions as much as you want.
Thanks,
John. Wait, somebody else has their hand up. I can't see who.
Second's Tracy.
Tracy,
Brandon.
go ahead.
Tracy was up before me.
Yeah, appreciate that. And just some context maybe and Brennan's right. A lot of this is new because surcharges, the minimums that the OFLPF received in the past, and harvest tax went to large fire costs. Now they're going to base budgets, as Brennan and Nancy and Lorna described. But the reality is the minimums themselves were always split about 3/4 of a minimum was maintained by the district in the past. And that was then distributed based on where the money came from. So there is some history there of one piece of the pie that EFC is getting here of the minimums and the history that it was always dispersed back to the district it came from, not pro rata by acres split out between everybody. And then one other quick comment, just for context here also, that with House Bill 3940 and other movement that's been done with budgeting tactics in the past, particularly with the large fire fund and more eligibility to the large fire fund, there's less and less suppression, very little sitting on a budget anymore. So reality is most of the dollars that are received and collected for revenue are actually for readiness only. There's very little suppression anymore inside of a district budget. So again, I'm not a voting member or anything on this, but this disclosure that it feels like the best option is to put it back to where it came from rather than a pro rata, because it's mostly readiness that's supporting the boots on the ground per se, getting ready for fire at that district specifically.
Thank you, Tracy. John?
Yeah, I really echoing what Tracy and a number of others have just said. Yeah, it seems appropriate to go back to the districts where it originated at. The Southwest Oregon had been thrown out as an example. There's a much higher level of preparedness needed in those regions, and to move that money strictly on acres to another district that maybe doesn't need that as much or as many resources for readiness is going to leave an area like Southwest Oregon in a real pickle budget wise. So I think the appropriate path would be based on where those revenues came from.
Thank you, John. Last call for any questions. Otherwise, I'll look for some motions with these two decision items. Okay, hearing no other comments or questions, let's break this up. I'll look for a motion. Can I have a motion, please, for the percentage of Oregon Forest Land Protection Fund revenues to allocate to district budgets?
Mr. Chair, I move in the interim time period until the next state fiscal year starts that the Emergency Fire Costs Committee use 97% as the percentage of the OFLPF revenues to allocate to district budgets.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second, any discussion? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor respond with aye.
Aye.
Aye. I believe that was everybody, but I'll ask if there's any opposed, please respond with the same sign. Okay. The motion carries. Thank you for that. Let's move on to disbursements of the OFLPF revenues. Can I have a motion, please, on how we should allocate the revenues received from minimums and surcharges back to the districts?
I would move that the revenues received go back to the districts where they originated.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Bobby. Any discussion from committee members?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Do we need to specify that motion in the interim time period?
Sure.
Would you accept a friendly amendment, even though you've received a second on the motion?
Yes.
I would amend the motion to proceed with the words in the interim time period before the next state fiscal year. And Nancy can specify the fiscal year, or Tracy if they want. If not, then my friendly amendment would be in the time period before the next state fiscal year, and then the motion on the floor.
Okay, I'll repeat what I think I've heard. For the interim time period of the upcoming fiscal year, there is a motion that all OFLPF revenues for minimums and surcharges are allocated back to the districts from which they were received. Is there any discussion on that motion? I think I hodgepodged that all together into an acceptable motion.
Mr. Chair, just as a point of information, I would like the department to confirm that they have the collection metrics to be able to do this from the district, from the tax system and the districts.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Tracy, we do, yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
for
you.
the
Yep. Okay, we have a cleaned up motion that I've repeated. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion respond with aye.
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 Okay, again, in this case, I'll ask if there are any opposed, please respond with the same sign. Hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you. All right, moving on to decision item number 2. I'll hand it back to Michael and Tracy.
Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. We're going to get into the harvest tax portion of the OFLPF revenue. So there's, again, a lot of information here, so please just interrupt if you have any questions or any clarification on anything. So the chart that you see in front of you shows the 2025 calendar year revenues received from harvest tax. Just quick background on this. The rate increase to $1 for harvest tax to go towards fire suppression does not go into effect until January of 2026. So everything through calendar year 2025 remained with the existing rate of 62.5 cents per MBF. So just so folks have that context. And then on the Q4 volume, that is still an estimate. We won't get the actuals until next month. So just eyes wide open for everybody as we navigate this conversation. So definitely a lot of nuances with this one. Q1 and Q2, EFCC still was part of large fire costs, and part of the large fire cost system, I should say. Starting in July 1st, that's when it shifted over to being 100% general fund covered in terms of large fire costs. So with that, in the Q1 and Q2 of the 2025 harvest tax numbers, EFCC met their obligation from fire season 2024 to where they have, of the around $1 million that are there highlighted in red, a little over $1 million, there's $332,968 that are still available from that for disbursements that have not been used on large fire costs to date. And we'll get into that remaining total later on in the decisions and why we highlighted that for you. The 2025 Q3 and Q4 revenues, again, that's starting in July 1st through the end of the calendar year. That is revenue now per House Bill 3940 that will get diverted back to the districts to be applied towards their FY27 budgets, which we're here talking for today. And just clear it up again, those are tied to the existing rate of 62.5 cents per MBF. So the decision that we're getting made there that we need today is kind of two-pieced. We'll get into the first one here, and then on the next slide, we'll get into the broader discussion moving forward as well. But for the 2025 revenue that's been brought in, there's a couple different ways we can go about this that we'll need decision from you on. Is do we use just the 2025 quarter 3 and quarter 4 revenues and leave the remaining harvest tax revenue in the fund for future strategic investments or other items that you all seem fit? So that would be leaving the $332,000 in the fund and not dispersing that back out to the districts, or utilize the unspent harvest tax revenues from 2025 quarter 1 and quarter 2 plus the full amount from 2025 quarter 3 and quarter 4. Tracy, before I move on, anything from your perspective that I missed here or clarification?
Nope, spot on.
Okay.
What does utilize mean? Like, you've got this evidently extra money. Again, I am not terribly helpful here. I'm pretty ignorant. But you've got this extra money, including from 4 quarters of FY25. If you were to utilize the unspent harvest tax revenues, how would you utilize them?
So utilize in this context means make those available to go back to the district budgets to lower landowner rates, or if they stay in the fund, they would be in the fund available for whatever this group seems or they deem they want to use that for, right? Whether that's a future strategic investment request when that process gets identified, or it sits in the fund for further disbursement for something else moving forward. But that's what we mean by utilize.
I see. So the second bullet would decrease district rates.
Yes. More.
Oh, I see. So the U's in the first bullet would also, the 25 Q3 and Q4s would also decrease district rates.
Yes. Yep.
I get it.
So both options are going to decrease district rates, right? That was the intent of 3940. With the second bullet, you're just going to add an additional $332,000 to the quarter 3 and quarter 4 revenues that are already going back to the district budgets.
And the alternative is just to hang on to the money in case we want to spend it for something special.
Yep. And then Eric, I noticed a question in your chat. I'll get into that with the second slide when we get into discussion versus calendar year and fiscal year. And I think, and then the other piece we wanted to get the decision made today for FY27 is the allocation method. And it's utilizing, and currently what we utilize is pro rata when it comes to harvest tax revenue. So harvest tax revenue, apologies. Those just get applied equally based off district's timbered acres that they have within their district boundary. And if folks are interested in seeing that, we've got a chart that shows just the timbered acres for all the districts and what percentage of the harvest tax would go back to the individual districts based off those acreage totals. So as in terms of the other, I wouldn't say we really have other options available to us right now that are immediately available for us. It's something that we would need to spend some more time researching to kind of see what is the best method for getting those harvest tax revenues back to the districts. The pro rata is something we've historically used and something that's already set up and existing that works, but it would take more work behind the scenes to really figure out if there is a viable other option. And quite frankly, just to be open with this group, I don't know if we have the time for FY27 budget development to really go out and research another allocation method when it comes to the harvest tax that we can make sure is timely and accurate for our FY27 budget. So just eyes wide open for folks on that. So Brennan, maybe before, do you want me to get into the calendar year and fiscal year conversation on the second slide first before we start talking about any decisions?
Yeah, I think that seems prudent. Let's fully understand the situation in front of us.
Okay. All right. So if you want to go to the second slide or the next slide, sorry. So the other piece to this is really clarifying between what revenue totals we utilize, whether it's from a calendar year versus a fiscal year. So we kind of laid out some pros and cons for each. And I'm sure there'll be some questions on this one, just so folks have it. So please chime in if you have anything as I cover this, but I'm sure there'll be some more discussion afterwards. So by utilizing a calendar year, what this does for us, and this gets to your question, Eric, is we can use actual revenues utilized. So there is no reconciliation that will need to occur. So if we are over or under on our estimate that's used, then either the OFLPF will owe more money, and they'll have to transfer more money back to the department to get dispersed out to the districts, or they would just have an excess revenue in their account as well. So if by going by a fiscal year, how it would work is some of the pros are it does align with our fiscal budgets, and if chosen, one of the pros, it's just a 1-year benefit, is that with the amount of harvest tax going back to the districts, we could estimate the first and second quarters for 2026 and make those available to go back to the district budgets to lower rates. But some cons, estimates would need to be utilized for half of a year. So the first and second quarters of every budget cycle moving forward would be, the first 2 quarters would be an estimate, which we would lead to a reconciliation needing to be completed. And again, that's going to create more staff work and time. And then also with that, the OFLPF could potentially owe more funds to balance the budgets accordingly if the estimates were off. So those are some of the nuances in trying to make the decision between calendar year and fiscal year. My opinion on it is I think calendar year makes more sense because those are actual dollars that we know are received. It leads to less staff work down the line for having to go through reconciliations and make sure everything's accurate. And it's actual money in the bank that we've got per se to be able to disperse back to district budgets. And maybe before I open it up, Tracy, anything I missed here that we need to bring up?
No, spot on the pros and cons to each one of these. Both are implementable. From our end on the fiscal financial side, the amount of transfers and reconciliation that would need to occur on the fiscal year option would just add another level of complexity to the situation. And also with a reconciliation, it's going to sway potentially landowner rates more if something was way off on an estimate and it came in less. I always like actuals because then we know exactly what we're working with. So well explained, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah. Catherine?
Yes, a question to the department. Because this decision is for the interim time period, correct? Does a decision on the calendar, does any one of these decisions impact our future ability to make a different decision? Or if we make a decision on fiscal versus calendar year today, is it going to influence all future decisions? Can it be undone? Is my question.
I'm gonna attempt to answer it, and I'm sure Tracy will chime in if I'm off base. But so can it be undone? I think it could. The only nuance will be it may impact the next budget cycle to where maybe not as much is available in harvest tax to be able to disperse back to the district if we try to make a change. So I think eyes wide open, we'll need to be mindful because we don't want to account for certain revenue in one fiscal and then try to double count that for the next one, right? So I think that would be the one nuance that if you did decide to change course, yes, we can do it. It would just be something that there may be a short-term impact felt at the district level with rates to where there just wouldn't be as much available potentially that next fiscal year. So is that accurate, Tracy?
It is, Michael. Obviously, we want to try to get the answer right to start with, but there is flexibility there if need be, and something doesn't feel right in the future. And it wouldn't require all that much difference as far as how we set up budgets and how we integrate with them. My biggest concern, as Michael said, would be the blip for a year or two potentially of changing methodology and having to supplement money maybe to offset a rate adjustment potentially because of a decision of a change of methodology.
Yep. Yep. And I think another piece, Nancy and I were talking yesterday, is the calendar year. It would better align with CPI cycles as well. So I think that's probably another pro that I missed not including on this slide. So. And just for awareness, CPI is indexed on an annual basis moving forward per 3940. So for harvest tax minimums and surcharges, probably should have mentioned that at the beginning for clarification. But if CPI goes up, then we will see a slight adjustment with an upward tick of our minimum surcharges and the harvest tax rate.
So to summarize, if we follow our current methodology for doing this, then we are dealing with real money that we are allocating, not guesses for the future in a slightly uncertain economic situation. Which the last part is my editorial thing, which you don't have to agree with, but we're dealing with real dollars if we choose the current way we're doing it. We're not basing those decisions on estimates of future revenue.
Yep, I think you're spot on. And by fiscal year, you're making some guesses on what the log market's going to be like and overall market conditions, right? And obviously those can change, as you all are well aware, for the positive or negative, however you want to look at it. So you would be making some estimates just based off where you think market conditions might go.
Right. So we can keep the current system dealing with calendar years. And after we get done with our rulemaking, we could change it if we wanted to, after we saw what the real revenue coming in was during the interim time before the new rules take effect to implement the new bill.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from committee members? Okay, Michael, can you go back to the previous slide, or Ms. Lowen or Ms. Kuhn, whoever's running this? Okay, so there on the bottom of the slide, we have two decision items on this topic. Again, as a reminder, these are interim, and there can be a greater degree of analysis that we can dive into, specifically around the allocation method, as well as the calendar year or fiscal year that the work group can bring forward to the committee. This one is, I think, given the transition time period we're in between 3940 implementation and now a little bit more nuanced and complex, hence why we've had this information presented to us. So to clarify in my own words, to make sure I'm tracking properly, we currently have $300,000 available for disbursement. We have additional collections for Q3 and Q4 that will be received here very soon, correct? those would be the actual dollars that we have available for funding the FY27 budgets, if we so chose to do that, correct? Those would be the actuals.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the sum total if we used the available dollars from Q1 and Q2 and the dollars we will receive for Q3, Q4. Alternatively, we could choose to just disperse bullet 1 or bullet 2 or neither bullet, theoretically. Does that make sense to the committee members? Are they tracking?
Yep.
And then the other, and frankly, they're kind of linked, and it may be just one motion. That would be a calendar year motion that we disperse what was remaining and for the calendar year 25.
That's correct.
Any comments or opinions, or does someone want to present a motion? Any other questions? Catherine? Here. Okay, that's a legacy hand. Sorry, you're fine. Tracy, have at it.
Yeah, I just want to throw in one other thing for context here for contemplating that the harvest tax are brand new dollars coming into fiscal budgets. Those were always used for emergency fire costs in the past. So whatever decision you make here isn't necessarily going to be the wrong decision on this. For this piece here, the calendar year, as Catherine, you had eloquently said earlier, that will have more of an impact on decision made. But this one here won't have as much of an impact to the rates because it hasn't been on the rates before or on the budget before. So just want to throw out for context that, yep, we want the right decision, but in my opinion, there isn't like an overwhelming pressure here to get it absolutely right with this decision.
Thank you, Tracy. That's important to recognize. And then it's also important to recognize too that the overall impact to each individual district is small relative to the minimum and surcharges. Those are the primary revenue sources that this fund will be providing to the districts. Future years, it will grow when January 26th, when the rate increases to $1. But right now we're still working off the 62.5 cents. So, so let's break this in. Well, let's keep the allocation method as a separate decision.
Yeah.
If someone wants to, I'm just going to open this up. If someone wants to provide a motion for either of these, we can get started. Bobby, I see you coming off mute.
Do you want a motion for the calendar year and a separate one for the harvest tax revenue?
I think we can do that if it's simple. I think this is multivariate, right, in some ways. And so if it's simpler for people, and I think very logically to just do 3 different motions, one is the calendar fiscal year, one is the dollar amount we're going to provide, and one is the allocation method. If we want to do that, I'm good with that too. That will provide the direction that ODF needs, or we can lump them. Just makes the actual motion a little bit more complex and wordy if we lump them.
I'll make a motion to utilize the $332,968 from Q1 and Q2 plus Q3 and Q4 dollars for the harvest tax disbursement. I don't know if that's worded right.
Before you finish that motion, I think Catherine's comment on the previous motions of an interim decision, I think is an important for technical. So would you reword your motion And it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
pretty.
Into the interim until the end of this fiscal year, that unspent harvest tax revenues from Q1 and Q2 plus the full amount of Q3 and Q4 get dispersed through the harvest tax of the harvest tax.
I'm going to look to ODF to make sure that makes sense to them.
I think the only change instead of fiscal year, it should have said calendar year. 2025.
Okay.
So I hear a motion for calendar year 2025, the current known available amount for Q1 and Q2 of $332,968 plus the revenue received for Q3s and Q4 revenue for timber harvest taxed will be submitted to the districts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
All second.
John seconds. Any discussion on that motion?
Catherine here. I'm concerned about spending the full amount from 25 quarter 3 and quarter 4, especially quarter 4, without knowing how much that is going to be for the fourth quarter of this calendar year. And that is my hesitation. Because that is not a real dollar amount in my view. It's an estimate.
I'm gonna look. That's a good question, and that I share the apprehension, but if I understood what was described by ODF is that we will know what those dollars are before we allocate them.
Yep. Yes.
So right now, we don't know what they are because they haven't closed out the calendar year. But when we do allocate hard dollars back to the districts, it will be a known and received dollar amount. It'll be actual dollars, not a projected amount.
Yep, spot on. So in February, when we get the final actual for quarter 4, that is what will get transferred back to the districts, not the estimate you see on the screen right now.
And your concern, Catherine, is relating to the fiscal year versus calendar year discussion, which is I share that same concern. So we would be allocating calendar year 2025 timber harvest tax dollars with a bit of a caveat that some of the Q1 and Q2 dollars were already spent on large fire for last fiscal year. That's the bit of the nuance this year. And in future years, we can, it'll be a full calendar year revenue source received.
Right. And in our current motion on the floor, Mr. Chair, was the allocation method specified? I
No,
lost that in the details. Okay.
It was
wasn't
not. That'll be
specified.
a separate discussion and decision item.
Okay, I think for me, I think it's part of the same package, but I would say that I will vote for this motion, but I am concerned that we are making decisions about revenue that we haven't fully realized. But that is my strict fiduciary concern. I realize the legislature does that all the time. So I just want to say that. And but I do want to comment that if it does come in an under amount, the less than the projection, knowing what I know about harvest in the fourth quarter of this year, that the department informed the Emergency Fire Cost Committee immediately.
Understood. And just to clarify, this is a complex issue and it is a bit muddy. The dollars, there will be no projection. We're just going to give direction that the dollars that we receive for fourth quarter will be what we allocate. So we're only giving direction. We don't know what those exactly are. We're not making a dollar amount, specific dollar amount projection at this time. Once all monies are received for Q3 and Q4, we will know exactly what those are. That will be the dollar amount. Only for Q3 and Q4, the dollar amount we received will be sent back to the districts. Plus
Okay.
the $330 odd thousand. So we're in alignment. I think it was just, again, it's a complex issue.
Right, and I think for people following this, I believe it's important that they know that we're thinking of all the nuances that impact not only the state's budget, but the individual district budgets, and that we've
Correct.
thoughtfully addressed it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. So all those in favor of the motion that I really don't want to repeat, but we're on videos, so I think we'll be good to go back. Respond with aye, please.
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, the motion carries unanimously, and we'll move on to the next motion. Let's focus the next motion on specifically calendar year or fiscal year, though I think we already covered that in the first motion. But just just to make sure we're covering our bases, do we have a motion on if we're going to allocate calendar year or fiscal year? Just to be very clear.
For FY27.
Yes, for FY27 budgets, are we going to allocate calendar year timber harvest tax revenue or fiscal year timber harvest tax revenue? And now that I'm saying it, I'm actually going to say it's a moot motion because we've just chosen to allocate all of the calendar year revenue. Okay, so I rescind my request for a motion. Let's then move to a motion on how we allocate the allocation methodology, a pro rata per acre that the ODF has good data on, or another method. I'll open it up for any questions before we seek a motion. And I will add, I did have one idea that would work in terms of, I think would work. Tracy, you can tell me I'm wrong here. Just so we can make sure that we have more than one option on the table, we could take this timber harvest tax revenue and split it 1/12 equally across all districts. And that's somewhat a question to Tracy on the difficulty of that. I'm not advocating for this, to be clear. I'm just offering other ideas.
Brennan, as far as implementation, whatever methodology would come out, we can implement anything because it's just math. But with that said, the consequences of doing it just 1/12 to everybody, that's where the decision-making, obviously, of the committee needs to come in. And that's where the biggest consequences will be based on readiness budgets and rates and all of that. Yep.
Again, I don't think it's a good idea. I only offer it for discussion because not all districts are the same in terms of the amount of available timber harvest, timber managed lands, right? And those revenues would get redistributed and likely an unfair way, just based upon managed lands and harvest across all the districts.
And what's the pro rata option here? Is it pro rata the amount paid by district relative to the amount paid by all districts?
It has to do with the amount of timbered acres they have within their district boundary compared to the overall total statewide.
Why would we do that? I mean, why wouldn't we just do it pro rata the amount paid by district? That should be pretty easy math.
I'll look to Michael, but Heath, it's my understanding that we don't have the systems necessarily in place to determine exactly where that was collected. And it's collected based on timber harvest at the mill, not necessarily where it was harvested. And we do know that there's a fair amount of we have a statewide market, right? Or at least very regional in terms of market areas. And so logs may be shipped out of district. They may be harvested in one district and shipped to a market area in a different district.
Crazy. I didn't actually know that's how the harvest tax was assessed.
Well, it's a self-reported tax to some degree, but it's, based on the log scale at the mill.
Yep, no, you're spot on, Brennan, and that's kind of why I stated up front there too. I'm not comfortable in a timely manner. We have the right systems in place to really adequately look at other options like that in a timely manner for our FY27 budgets. So
Yeah, and Heath, to your point, I think that's something that the committee should really look into, the work group, as they present options for different ways that does allow ODF some time to perhaps build a system that matches something like that. But they need to dive into that and unpack that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
for illustrative purposes, Heath, I write the checks for harvest tax and I calculate them. So I'm familiar with how this works. My family, located in Columbia County, is lucky enough to be on the other side of a bridge across the Columbia, and we sell into Washington. Okay, we still pay harvest tax on that money. It's on the board feed harvested. So we keep track of each load and that. So
they should know where it was harvested and would be able to attribute the harvest tax to the district in which it was harvested. If that's not the case, it seems that you would be misattributing harvest tax to budgets, but I must just misunderstand. It's fine.
You can also cut in one district and sell in another district.
Fair enough. That's true. But to your example, where you're selling in Washington, it's still attributed to an Oregon harvest.
Right. It's still attributed to an Oregon harvest, and I pay. I wrote the check based on that. So the thing is, at the moment, we know how much protected timber, forest land is in our other land is in a district. I mean, we have that metric at this point in time. And I think that that's a fair way to do it. I would not be in favor of dividing it by 12 and giving it to all of the districts. And the reason being because the different sizes of different districts, the different wildfire risk that districts face, and the actual existence of our complete and coordinated system, where some districts, like the Northwest District, are a net outsourcing spot for firefighting. We send resources other places, but don't have as many fires in our area, but yet we collect because of timber, we do collect a larger amount of harvest tax. And I would prefer that it be spent and come back to the district. But we do share our resources with the other districts in Oregon.
Any other comments or questions from committee members on this? I'll look for a motion on how we will allocate harvest tax for the interim FY27 budget. I said that wrong. Looking for a motion, an interim motion. I'm looking for a motion on how to allocate harvest tax for specifically the FY27 budget.
That's hilarious. I mean, you're basically just looking for a motion that it be allocated pro rata timbered acres, right? I can't make that motion, I don't think, but that's what you're looking for.
Ultimately, I think that's likely the decision to make for this fiscal year specifically, with a recognition that that work group needs to really dive into this and look at some of the things that you brought up.
Yeah, sorry, I was writing a note, but I'd move that the be distributed in the interim. It be distributed pro rata and stop motion. But yes, we need to. I mean, it seems pretty logical that we should be able to track harvest back to the location and tax payments based on a notification number, and something to be taken up in the future.
Yeah, John, I think the one thing to potentially amend your motion is pro rata based on the amount of timbered acres per district.
Yes, thank you.
Do we have a sec? Go ahead.
But before that's seconded, do you want timbered acres or do you want it protected acres?
I offer that to the committee.
I would argue they're one and the same.
Protected timbered acres or total protected acres? Is
Well,
that what you're?
protected timber acres is what Catherine said, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just saying that you have protected acres, and then you have timbered acres in there, but it might be timber that's not protected by the department. I just think that for clarity purposes, you should get the right thing that replicates what you current operating procedure.
Yeah.
Well, and
Protected timber acres.
Okay. So I'm gonna repeat the motion. The motion is for FY27 timber harvest revenue will be allocated back to the districts based on a pro rata timbered acres. Protected timbered acres.
Right.
John, can you confirm that's the motion you want to present?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Confirm.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you, Bobby. Any discussion on the motion?
Brandon, this is Tracy. I'm sorry if you see my hand up. I know before he said it's kind of muted, but I just want to make sure that maybe you need a little bit of wording clarification within that. Dealing with protected acres, and Catherine, you mentioned it, and a few others, that I would be very specific on the wording, potentially that it's private and public timber acres, excluding federal agreements or BLM WOOP agreement, just to make sure those timber acres aren't involved in that split also. Because technically those are protected acres through agreement. So just throwing that out as a suggestion on the wording.
I appreciate the clarification. We're now really stretching my Robert's rule of orders here on we have a motion, we have second. I, does
Withdraw
does-
that motion. See if the person wants to withdraw that motion and then
Yeah.
start over, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Yes, I would withdraw the motion,
thank you.
so it can be, private protected timber acres could be added in.
And those are uh, private, but there's a distinction between private, and Tracy, jump in here. There's a distinction between private, state, and other forested acres, correct?
Correct, yeah. The private and public state protected is really what the focus is, and probably on what the intent that you're looking for to be split pro rata, excluding the BLM WOOP timber acres that we protect through an agreement, and excluding other various small agreements we have typically with federal counterparts on Army Corps Engineer and BIA.
Okay, so we want to focus this motion on private and state timbered acres, protected timbered acres, correct?
Tracy, why wouldn't you suggest what a motion could be, and then somebody could say they agree that's their motion?
Well,
Thank you.
I
Thank
think
you.
I think Michael, it might be good for you to chime in and hear us also on the wording of it, because I do think the wording in this case is pretty important to make sure we're implementing the right acres. But and Michael, from your vantage point here also, how would we word that to separate out those federal agreements that tie to timber acres? So, because technically they are protected by us, the nuance of the word protected. So what's your thoughts there, Michael?
No, I think you're on the right track, Tracy. I'm just trying to, how can we make this as simple as possible for Brennan? And I'm wondering, do we do that, or you have that chart, Tracy? Should we just base it off that? Because that does that include the BLM
It does
and
not
federally?
include the BLM.
So I'm wondering if we just throw that chart up and say disperse it per the percentages laid out on that chart, which is pro rata.
There's a question in the chat from Eric. Why are we excluding federal protected acres, BLM and others under contract? And
With that said, you don't have to necessarily, but we don't have any harvest coming off of those lands.
there is some, but it is a minute share of the total harvest.
Right.
And so it's a minute share of the revenue received under timber harvest tax. Eric, if you, given that you're limited to just the chat, if you have a motion that you want to bring forward, please type it up. Can we bring up that chart? I think that's a good way to probably get towards a succinct motion. Unless Eric brings forward something different. Can we bring up that chart, please?
Sorry, Brian, you wait. Michael, you had mentioned you're waiting on me to bring up the chart, and I'm assuming the one
No,
that
Jen, I think Jen's got a copy of it. She had it
she
pulled
has it.
up
Okay,
prior to the
good.
PowerPoint, so she
Okay,
can,
awesome.
I think she has access to it. So we included, so just go to the timber acres split tab, please. So this is what the timbered acre split would look like, not including the BLM acres.
Is this specific to BLM or does it include other contract acres like BIA and Army Corps?
This does include BIA and Army Corps. That is a very minute amount of acres compared to the BLM WOOP agreement for timber.
I would, yeah. And Eric, as I think about this, Eric does bring up a valid point, I think, around why exclude federal acres, because I think we do need to recognize the BLM and the WOOP and the value of having that agreement in place and any benefits for them to be able to have decreased rates, just like any other landowner, I think is important, just to keep them a part of the system for us. So I would, the more I think about it, I do think there's some value in the question Eric asked for this group of why would we exclude the federal acres? Because they're paying the same rate, and especially on the west side there's a ton of value in keeping them in the system for us, providing protection.
So
And Michael, this is Tracy, and
I'm
Sorry,
gonna jump in.
Yep.
To put this back into some context, this is a one fiscal year decision, and overall, while the dollars of harvest tax revenue are not insignificant, they are a small proportion of each district's budget that will go back, especially as we allocate them across 12 different districts and different percentages. It's my recommendation to the committee at this point, and recognizing Eric's comment that I think is valid, that we put forward a motion to allocate based upon total number of protected timbered acres in each district. It's a simple process, and defer further deep dives and analysis on a more equitable way to allocate this to the work group to bring forward to the committee.
Brandon, this is Tracy. If I could just mention a few other maybe nuances for the record that BLM WOOP acres for timber are not a constant across the state because the east side does not have WOOP land. So it's an inconsistent metric potentially to use for splitting overall harvest tax across the entire state. Just something there for contemplation. And then one other note that again, the committee will determine what methodologies to use through rule going forward. But this is one that potentially, if you make a decision to change it a year or two from now, could have monumental differences in rates for budgets also, because if we don't include BLM now, include them 2 years from now, the east or the west side districts will see a drastic reduction, and the east side districts will see a drastic increase because they're no longer splitting the entire harvest tax amount. Thank you.
I appreciate that. That was good context.
Right. This is Catherine, Mr. Chair. I believe that this is the forest products harvest tax, money generated from the harvest of timber. And that if you start allocating it to how much just federal timber period and just not the specific WOOP covered acres, then you are skewing the amount of where the harvest takes place and versus where the trees are sitting. And this is a revenue source that is coming from the landowners that are harvesting trees. And if you just apply it, having the trees does not equal the harvest, does not equal paying the tax. and it's merely one source. So I would not be in favor of allocating it. I believe that BLM is a fantastic partner and the WOOP dollars and they pay into us, but I do not believe that we should include any other federal timber in there, just plain acres.
Well, and I mean, this is an allocation of harvest tax, right? And those WOOP dollars aren't in the denominator. They're not in these harvest tax dollars. So it should just be allocated on the basis of acres that paid the harvest tax. If anything, it would be ideal if it was allocated by district on the basis of the harvest tax paid. That would make the most sense, of course, but Michael's telling us he can't do that. So it seems, you know, gosh, it's a tough nut to crack. Allocating it on the basis of timbered acres, excluding BLM lands and other contract protection acres is it's pretty fuzzy to me.
Well, please remind us, Tracy, for the interim decision for the allocation of these monies, how much funds are we talking about given our previous motion? With knowing that the estimate for fourth quarter is an estimate.
Right, right. And Catherine, just for clarification there, on the last motion where it would exclude the BLM acres or include them.
No, I think she's asking just
Yeah.
what is the estimated third quarter and fourth quarter harvest tax?
Well, I'm
revenue?
trying to think of how big of a pot of money are we dealing with here?
Rough
Roughly
math
2
in
million.
my head. Yeah.
Right, so we're dealing with the allocation of roughly 2 million with, by the way I take this conversation today, conversations to do a deeper dive into the future. And that any decision we make today, I've heard it both ways, doesn't have relevancy to the future and does have relevancy to the future. So I need to figure that one out. But we're talking about the allocation of $2 million across 12 districts at the present time, which means a lot for the smaller districts. I do realize that. But
And for what it's worth, Tracy, I don't know I think 2 million is a little high. I think it's technically around 1.2 because you're only doing quarter 3 and quarter 4 plus the 300,000. So it's around 1.2 million.
Correct.
Correct.
okay, so we're talking about the allocation of 1.2. Brennan, I think I saw Nancy's hand up.
I was just going to provide the number that Michael Curran provided.
So to summarize, we are centering in around the acres, a pro rata based on acres, and it's the how are we lumping or splitting acres that we're going to focus on potentially as an interim decision for this FY27. The options are, and this chart is helpful, with the exception that it doesn't show BLM acres, because if we make a choice to do based on all protected forest acres, the problem presents, as Tracy said, that there are, that's becomes the east side, west side issue, with a unequal allocation. If we focus just on private and public, i.e. private lands plus state lands, then this allocation would be based on more or less the split you see on the chart, correct, Tracy?
Correct.
Okay. Tracy, you have your hand up. Do you have a comment or some context to provide?
Yeah, if I could just add, Brennan, to your comment you made there, So those BLM acres come out roughly to 2.3 million acres. So a huge chunk of acres that would be added onto the west side. And not saying right, wrong, or different, just giving information. But one thing to keep in mind also that, based on projections that we've run already, just using the private and public timber acres, excluding BLM and those other federal agreements, I'll just use CUD as an example. So CUD's projected amount would be about 8% of the harvest tax amount based on that methodology. And if we reverse that, I shouldn't say reverse, but include the BLM acres, their 8% would go down maybe in half. So that would be roughly a 4-cent increase to timber just through that decision, just for that district. So just a little context again of, it may not seem like a lot of money, but Catherine, you mentioned, and CUD isn't a smaller district necessarily, but you mentioned the impact, and even 1.2 million, I mean, you're looking at a 4-cent swing in a timber rate based on the decision to include or exclude. Yep.
Right.
But
in
if
the
I understand
small
this right, like, if the objective is to return the money to the people who paid it, right? The harvest tax dollars that you are looking to allocate, or at least attribute the benefit of, do not include any monies paid by BLM, correct? So this, total allocation you were talking about, this $1.2 million doesn't include any BLM dollars.
So my understanding that there are harvest revenue receipts generated off of BLM harvests. The point is their harvest is so small that it is not, doesn't move the needle on the total revenue of harvest tax.
Well, that would be an interesting number. That is to say, what proportion of this total was generated by BLM?
Correct. Nancy, go ahead.
Yeah, I can't verify this with certainty but my recollection in looking into the harvest tax in the past was, I believe, from ODF's economists that had stated that the federal agencies push that harvest tax onto their contracts. So it's not, per se, federal people paying for it, right? It's not coming out of the federal coffers. Just FYI.
John.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying, Nancy, is the purchaser, the federal timber sale purchaser pays the harvest tax, which again, we don't, it seems like it would be nice to have this ability to track the harvest revenues back to the stump. Absent that, I don't know what that allocation looks. I don't know what, because that would also mean Forest Service sales, right? Which we aren't even talking about Forest Service sales. So there's going to be dollars in here that were generated from Forest Service sales as well in that harvest revenue. So just a thought, just a clarification on that.
Okay, I feel the need, while an important decision, we are up against time, and we need to make a decision, recognizing this is an interim decision for one fiscal year. It will have repercussions, and after comments and context from ODF, we have to recognize that it will need to be described to the districts that this is an interim step and we could see changes in the future.
Brendan, may I make a potential suggestion? I mean, I feel like the staff work here has been a little wanting. Is it not possible that we could give staff general direction? That is to say, we would like to see the benefit of these dollars go to the generally in the direction of the people who paid the dollars, and have them come back to us with a recommended motion for a special meeting or something of that nature. I feel like we're about to cram something through relatively clumsily, and we're not in a position to think it all the way through.
I support that. I support that, and it can be probably likely a quick special meeting for this. I would look to the rest of the committee if there's some thumbs up to that idea for continued staff work, given all the context that we've provided.
And for the record,
I support that.
again, I'm not a voting member, but if there is such a thing as district budget timbered acres, that, like Eric suggests there, that might get you close. Though again, it may still be skewed heavy by BLM acres if it is included in district budget acres.
So my question, while we support that, Michael and Tracy, we're at the beginning of January here. Budget season is quickly approaching. What is our time period here that the committee needs to make a decision so that districts can move forward with their budgeting process and understand the revenue sources they'll be receiving from this fund from the committee?
Michael, I can take that if you want. I guess just a little time wise here, budget kickoff starts here next week, basically, with the fiscal year budget templates. And then districts start building their budgets and programs. And then usually districts, by mid-March to end of March, maybe beginning of April, will have their budgets completed for their association meetings coming up, depending on the time of those by district. So in my opinion, it would be safe by, let's say, beginning of March, that final decisions would be made for putting onto a budget so districts can see the impact of what their rates are going to be and their budget final numbers. So they have some time to react to that if they want to make adjustments to other line items.
Okay, and recognizing that when this committee gives direction on this, that there will be some time that will be spent by within your department to figure this out, I would propose that we circle back on this specific decision in a early February meeting. Well, I take that back. I forget that we lost a week for the holidays. Sometime potentially the second week of February. I'd like to move forward with this decision quickly, while a tough nut to crack, to use Heath's words, which I completely agree with. We need to act and not let this languish. Does the committee agree with the first part of February meeting for this decision? Nancy, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question I had there, Brennan. Recognizing that time frame was that Tracy outlined, I was curious if waiting to March 3rd creates any tension in that timeline, just because you already have a regular scheduled meeting.
Thank you for that. I forgot about the March 3rd meeting. Does that put undue pressure on ODF to quickly act after a decision made if it's made on March 3rd?
I think once we have a decision, we can get it implemented pretty quick because it's just throwing whatever the revenue total is into the rate page on the budgets, which is super quick. I do just eyes wide open. And part of this is me still being new in this position and not fully understanding the harvest tax side of the equation with how the agency interacts with it, and what data, more around what data we have readily available. When you say quickly act on trying to find, I don't know if we have the necessary information to quickly act. We can try, and we can be in conversation, Brennan, with you behind the scenes as we navigate this. But just know there's some unknowns and some concerns on my end, not knowing if we have the right information readily available to get you what you're after for a March decision. So just eyes wide open from a concern that I've got on that. But we can navigate that behind the scenes and get to a better spot
So
as we can come March.
My recommendation, when we come March, we need to make a decision. The ODF needs it. So between now and then, if committee members have specific information that they would help inform this decision, that they send that to Nancy. And that will, let's say that due date would be the first part of February to ask for that information and have that, if not the end of this month, so that ODF can try to compile some of that and tell us what they can and can't generate for us in our decision. And we'll bring that forward. And also give committee members a little bit more time to think about this and marinate on it. And then in that March meeting, my charge to all of you is we have to make a decision and move forward at that March 3rd meeting. And it should be, that decision should be based on the information that ODF provides us if you have any follow-up questions, so that it can, as Tracy said, it's just math, right? So if we have charts that show percentages, we can choose a chart or a combination of charts to make the decision and give direction to the state. Is that clear as mud to committee members?
Mr. Chair, Catherine here. I would just say that putting on my hat as the president of an association that needs to start working on their budget, that the longer we delay, the more difficult it becomes for my association to figure out what revenue is coming in from this source, and either gives go ahead or shut down decisions on certain aspects that we might be considering. And so the struggle that we're making with this decision now is nothing compared to the districts on the ground working on their budgets.
That is recognized, but we're pushing this ball down the road, and it's landing with a giant thud into the district budget development and the budget committees. And I appreciate that. I think we have a desire to get something that is sort of right, as close as we can for this fiscal year budget, with a recognition that there's probably a lot to unpack here and analyze for that work group and bring it forward, a suite of options for the entire committee, so that we can set those future years some certainty for the districts to understand how their revenues will be coming in.
Yep, and based off what questions we get, we could throw some lags in the budgets for potential revenues as a baseline, with a caveat that this could change, but at least show some revenue coming in based off the information we're looking for and what we're finding. So I think there's a way we could thread the needle there to help the districts out as much as possible, just knowing that that revenue number may change slightly depending on what decisions made in March.
Right.
Can you go ahead, Catherine?
I don't want to leave the districts out to hang to dry here to get into a moment of indecision when they should be preparing and working through the new world and the new funding world that they have. And that's my concern.
But Catherine, are you opposed to not making a decision on this today?
No, I'm not opposed to not making a decision on it today. I'm just saying that if we move it, that our trauma with making the decision isn't at all the same as a district trying to put together their budget with a bunch of new moving pieces. That's what I'm saying.
That's true, but they can focus on the cost side of those budgets right now. And, that doesn't need to be shaped necessarily by this input in the spreadsheet right away. I think we've got a little room to maneuver here.
No, and I agree, but I just wanted to bring it up. So if the district forester's on the line, know that we are keeping their workloads in mind.
A valid comment, Catherine. Thank you for recognizing that. Okay, one quick question. Tracy, you did mention when we would expect the timber harvest revenue, the known number for Q3 and Q4. What date was that?
Based on talking with Forest Resources and finance staff over there, it would be by February 15th.
Okay. And that would be helpful just for some added context to understand what we're really talking about in terms of total revenue for fiscal year 27. Okay. All right. Let's close that unfinished agenda item. We can, and sorry, lost my notes here. We'll move to agenda item number 6. We can move through these last agenda items very carefully. Go ahead. This agenda item number 6 is concerning our statutory requirement to review and consult with the state forester regarding the purchase of emergency fire cost suppression insurance. We are statutorily required at our first regular scheduled meeting to consult regarding the purchase of emergency fire cost suppression insurance and the leverage of coverage. I'm going to invite Mr. Curran to provide a quick update as he has met with DAS and talked about the availability of such insurance. Mr. Curran.
Yep, thank you. And I think, Jen, we can drop the PowerPoint. There we go. Perfect. So yes, we met with DAS, or reached out to DAS about a month and a half ago to start the conversation. Met with them a week before last, I believe. So they did their work with Willis Tower and Watson, and as expected, it came back that there's just not a current market right now for an insurance policy of this kind. At the time we had it, very well known. It was a one-of-a-kind policy that was available and earmarked really specifically towards us. And when we got rid of that and decided to non-renew it, there just wouldn't be a future market for it that they advised us of, and that's still the case as it stands today. So there is potential options, and I'm quickly learning a lot about the insurance industry. I never knew with this conversation. I still have a lot to learn there with it. There are some other options that they talk through in terms of structured programs, or they call them parametric solutions, that we didn't get a lot of time to really dig into the details, but it sounds like there are potential options to pursue if there was an interest to go down this path, but it would take too much time and effort and analysis to get that ready prior to fire season 2026 that earliest you would really be looking at it would be for 2027. But with it, it takes considerable time, energy, and funding to be able to make it happen. And talking with DAS, they were thinking a minimum of anywhere from 50 to 75,000 just to be able to begin work on that. So I think awareness for those group that maybe there's some outside solutions out there, but as it sits right now, there is just no market as it stands, and it'll take considerable work to be able to see what's out there and what could get developed for us. So.
Thank you, Michael. To be clear, this is an information item. Our nexus with this statute is really to just have a discussion and provide the private perspective to the state forester on if it's a prudent decision that we would perhaps recommend, but not actually as a choice, not as a decision item. So if there's I'll open it up if there's questions or comments from committee members on this topic. Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the administrator report. I'm going to warn the public at this time that at the conclusion of Nancy's report will be the public comment and good for the order. And agenda item number 8. So I request if you do have a public comment that you take the moment now to raise your hand and we'll take your comments in order as they appear. With that, we'll move to agenda item number 7, the administrator report. Nancy, can you please provide your report?
Sure. Thanks, Brennan. Nancy Hirsch, Emergency Fire Cost Committee Administrator, and going to keep this brief. If there's questions, we can add to it. But in the interest of time, this is really just a follow-up from the November meeting where Brennan had asked for committee members to reach out to me and let both of us know kind of where your interest lied in the work groups that we talked about that would really support the work of the full committee as it relates to the rulemaking that you have touched on even here today about the need for that. So we've identified 5 work groups and are kicking the first one off actually next week. Obviously, it's a collaborative process with the Department of Forestry and ultimately a very public process. As ideas are generated, they will be considered by the full Emergency Fire Cost Committee in your public meetings. And it's there where you will develop further, consider and decide on what actual rules you want to move forward during 2026. And of course, that'll be way down the road and include public meetings and public hearings, etc. I do expect here next week to begin to stagger some of the other work groups and hopefully have a couple, 2 of those more probably activated in February. So you'll probably be, some of you will be receiving a doodle poll, and we'll just continue to stagger this until we get them all up and running and bringing the work back to the full committee. So that's all I have, Brennan.
Thank you, Nancy. Any questions or comments from committee members? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to agenda item number 8, public comment. Looking for any raised hands in the chat. Okay. Seeing none, in this case, the next meeting of the EFCC is scheduled for Tuesday, March 3rd. If committee members concur, we'll adjourn this meeting. So it's your last chance to step forward and say anything, committee members, in this public meeting. All right. Thank you very much. I'll adjourn today's January 6, 2026 meeting at 12:19 p.m. Thank you very much for your time and for the good discussion and considerations of the decisions we had to make. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brent.